All right, our next speaker is George and Hines from the School of Architecture at the University of Kentucky.
Thanks, everybody. I will be quick. My name is Jordan. I teach at the University of Kentucky School of Architecture. Thanks for this opportunity. It's really cool. I feel like I'm sitting in a syllabus here. So it's like the drawings, thank you. No one's thanked you yet. It's really cool to feel your energy. Hopefully we take something away from this with you all. Okay, so this presentation is about some recent work that I've been doing, thinking about, we had 2 kids, and so I don't get much sleep. And so I feel like my memory is just degrading, you know, like every day. And then you see them growing up, and it makes you think about what you're remembering and how you just piece it all back together in the best way that you can. And so I've heard this term a lot today about people, there's some really strong themes here, which is really interesting, and a lot of our processes are actually very shockingly similar. It's just we're all sort of putting the pieces back together in different ways, and I think that's a very cool thing to think about. The processes aren't so drastically different as I might have imagined, but it's really, really cool. So I'll just get into it. This is some recent work that I have been working on. I do lots of different types of work. I teach in the School of Architecture, but I guess I'm mostly an artist. I tend to dabble mostly there, and I teach in architecture. That was my background, and so I can channel it there in second year undergrad, but I feel like most of what I do has very little to do, and it was kind of nice to hear the differentiation of thinking about the types of ways that you can think about practice and thinking, and it's nice to be amongst people that tend to do that as well, and not necessarily label things. Sorry, I'm switching mine. Your notes, not mine. Okay, so this is a couple of images from where I grew up, and I thought it was important for everybody to know. I follow a little bit of an untraditional path, in that into where I'm at now, like the left was my upbringing. So basically 300 people in the middle of nowhere. And then to the right, that's my dad. We're fishing. And sort of thinking about how these moments in life are, you're surrounded by these places that seem unchanged. So the left, if anybody is a rock climber, we have this world famous location called the Red River Gorge, and people come from all over the world to rock climb there. And so there's this idea that there are places in the world that are unchanged and you would like for them to remain that way. And then to the right, these moments that as they're happening, you know that they're never going to happen again. They're gone. So that's, you know, me having kids that bring those thoughts in the middle of the night. And so you're thinking about this combination of the unchanged and fleeting, and what does it mean to have them experience both at the same time all the time, in different varying degrees of intensity and out of order as well. This is another image from back home. This is my dad's shed, and the idea that not all places or spaces are necessarily memorable or remarkable. So this is a top elevation view of the side of one of his sheds, and then the inside view of that shed, just with the collection of all the stuff that he's amassed through making stuff forever, which I never really appreciated until now, of thinking about how he was a tinkerer and he's always making stuff, you know. He's always fiddling and moving this object to here to there in constant motion. Things are never fixed. It's never this way for very long. And I started to find that really, really inspirational, more than like infuriating where I can't find things. And so the drawings that I've been working on recently have sort of to take a step and think about feeling memories and not necessarily remembering it, and not really dwelling on if it's important that I actually do remember things clearly. Sort of take the pressure off so I don't feel like a constant failure where I don't remember a meeting or things, and I have to start finding a way to cope with that. And so this way of feeling these moments has become, I guess, healthier for me. And then making sure that as I'm feeling a place, that I guess I'm dwelling on the positive feelings of most of these places. So now I'm going to start walking through the process of leading up to some drawings, of the way I'm actually making them, and seeing some of your all's, the transparency with which you're letting us into your world. I really appreciate you all showing us how you're making things, and I'm going to do that from now on, because I'm a little guarded with that sometimes, and I did appreciate this very literal showing, this is how we did it, and I like that. So I wish I had done that. But feeling a memory, not remembering, began with just simple photography. You know, I have this phone, this crazy camera, I'm using it all the time. And so I started to mess with, like, as I'm moving through spaces and places, taking photographs that are intentionally either out of focus or through something, so that I'll never know what they were. And so this is a process of where I'm just starting to put things actually in front of the lens, so that I can't remember it, or I breathe on it and fog it, and I'll have no clue. Or I go really fast and take a photo, it's blurred, I'll never know. Or intentionally finding spaces that are unremarkable, but they did something. I remember them. I don't know what, but there's a fragment that's stuck and lodged in there, and I'm gonna remember it. It's gonna come back, and I have a feeling about it. So that's why I capture it. And so, as I'm taking photographs and thinking about how to compile these drawings, I can't help it but make things physically too, because my processes are both physical and digital, and the goal is to not really know maybe at the end, like, or care how they were made, but they're both. And so as I'm photographing, there's something missing about the tactile way of actually experiencing making it. In a photograph, I'm not a very good photographer, so I can only get so much joy in that, and I like to make things. And so what I started to do was thinking about the layers of, this is just silicone flashing, like rubberized roofing. Thinking about back to my dad's shed, where you make stuff with what you have. That's like that Kentucky part of me that I just can't get out. Where my first thought isn't how nice can this be, it's how quick can I make it, because the ideas go sometimes, and I have to act like now, or it's not going to happen. And so what I started to do was look at galvanized, just the sheet metal with the silicone on top of it, and mirrors, because I started to think, what are these materials that pick up the atmosphere with reflections? If you look around and you see the bits and pieces of everybody's presentations today that have been on the various drawings, it's been kind of crazy if you watch, you know, and you can see them picked up and just see this sort of accidents that happen. And so the next step was looking at sort of, you know, this is the sort of harshness of the shadow and light, and this sort of became an idea of the softness. I've noticed that when I tried to capture things in drawing, my first instinct, and maybe this is like the architect in me, is where I tend to dwell on the rigidness, or like let's say the sharpness of things, and I started to think about the gentleness or softness of experience versus the little gooier, let's say. And so to the left and to the right, this is actually layers of silicone. So this is no longer, this is an actual like product now. I've kind of graduated and said, I'm gonna try some nicer materials where I can put color into it. And so what I do with these is, back to putting stuff in front of the camera, is that I layer silicone with different degrees of color to get, and then I can peel it off. If you use the right type of silicone on the right subsurface, you can peel it off and it's really smooth. And now I have a gooey filter. So it's not just color, it's not plexiglass, or it's this other thing that picks up things. And so that became this whole thing where I was trying to make a photograph of a Francis Bacon painting and wrapping my face in silicone. So those things happen too when you make stuff a lot. And so this led to, you know, thinking about motion and memory. So as we never ever remember a place for a single moment in time, but as moving through it. And so this is where I started to add to a layer of the materials, of adding film to the layer. So bringing the actually being able to capture movement, and then that's just one more layer, back to your all's earlier where you layered into the sandbox. This is one layer of a frame, let's say, from physical to the gooey silicone to something else to an out of focus image, and to now film. And so these are starting to be some of the actual drawings. And so These two were actually formed, they were earlier, and these were single images that were sort of meant to capture, let's call it like a vibration of a space, that feeling of the aura, as was in the video earlier. That's sort of, these are both industrial, this is a steam plant and a backhoe, this construction equipment, and the way that those things seem to shake a place. And so these were made with, 200 layers of very, very transparent, like barely there layers. Which we've all probably found there's a threshold of layers when you're making a drawing, where I'm not sure the success any longer after 75. I don't know what the debate is on how many layers, but there becomes a point where it all merges together. But this is where I started to see the potential of the drawing and the idea that the memory can be expressed through it was mentioned earlier, this question of legibility, like, do you need to recognize it? And I feel like this is where it began to actually have that question of what's the purpose of a drawing? What's the purpose of a memory if you can't recall it? And I still think there's a lot of potential in a memory even if you can't quite grasp it. And so these started to lead to, thus the title of introducing color as another layer. These were color. There's two types of color that I'll end up using: a physical color, so something I'm making and bringing in, or something that's just purely digital. I've kind of left out the discussion of the digital in this. It's there, but I feel like it's another conversation. But I construct, and this is where the process might have been nice to show, construct some digital spaces that I bring into these to bring a sort of grit and unknowingness to things, so that it has these moments or marks as they've been discussed today. And sort of starting to get further away from what it ever is or what it ever was. And it's starting to combine multiple moments now. Before it was fixated on a single moment in time or a single experience, and now it's starting to be multiples collapsed. And finding a way to dissolve the edge, which is a problem that we've probably all encountered, is what to do with it. It's when you make a drawing, that pesky edge that just seems to stop things. And I've seen that handled so many different ways, and you can see it around the room, and it's such a cool topic. Just some more. I'm going to walk through a few. This actually began as an investigation of Shaker Village. So if anyone knows the Shaker tradition, it's really cool, kind of clean, like minimalist before. But they basically, these spaces are like mostly white. It's hard to capture. So then it became interesting to think about when a space is mute of texture and color, like most of their buildings, is what's it leave you with, if not anything specifically architectural? And so this is just showing, I did bring a little bit of the process where I'll actually print and then airbrush on top of it. Like I said, I get it from my dad where I'll dabble, and a studio mate has an airbrush. So I started to airbrush, and you know how it goes, where you start to get influenced and you look around. But really what it was is I realized, and you can see the printer rolled because I didn't seal it right. But it's that bit that comes in, the grit, as it's been called today, or those other things. And so this is where the airbrush can bring in textures. And I've seen this technique too today, where you'll photograph your work at multiple angles and then recollapse it back on itself. And so that's a part of that lineage, I guess, of not, just because you make a drawing flat doesn't mean you only look at it flat. It means that you look at it from multiple angles and then you bring it back in on itself. Just some close-ups of that texture. And I'm not very good at airbrushing, so lots of mistakes happen. But it's fast and it dries way quicker than painting. And so the last few images are just going to show some like where it's at to this point, and I'm sort of left here at this moment of continuing, which has been another theme of wondering where things are going, but I tend not to dwell on that too much and just kind of let it happen. So this was a building being torn down that I filmed, and I filmed this before that I made these drawings, so this is a new drawing from an old shot that I made, where I'm just showing the layers now of, 300 layers of the same motion and how those add up and add up and add up. With an interest in that, if I'm calling them drawings, sometimes I feel pressure to incorporate the line. Like, where is the line? If it's a drawing, then where is it? And I don't know where that comes from, but I keep asking myself. And so the line is the texture, I guess, but if that could be a stretch. So I just wanted to show the same image, but with the introduction of the physical materials on top of it. So that's before, where it gets smooth and soft and blurry. And then how the introduction of just the physical textures and the camera filters can transform it, you know, with different degrees of different colors. And this one will actually introduce other places on top of itself too, so not just the one moment of time. But they get different kind of results. And so these two are just a view from a parking garage. So I haven't named any of these yet because I'm worried about labeling them, because I don't know what they are. And I'm worried if I start calling them something, then that'll make me think about it and I'll stop. But perhaps it's time to go back. The autopsy, as it was called earlier, you know, that's always a good thing. But I feel like, I don't know if I'm ready yet. So the left to right, different times of day are incorporated. So this is the same view from the same parking garage, but just on multiple times, different times of day from video, and then overlaying the physically made things with the different. The one on the right actually is like 5 videos on top of itself from different angles, and the one on the left from the same. This is another one of a building being torn down. This is just starting to be a fascination of trying to show the softness out of really destructive things. So being from Kentucky again, it's a very beautiful place, but has been, let's say, impacted quite a bit through its history. So I'm very cautious about celebrating pain. So this is a building that I drive past. So this is just moving around. And what I have found is that I feel like the more unremarkable the place, the least connection I have to it, the more comfortable I am with it never being legible. And I think that's because I don't have there's no meaning to me about the place, and I can dwell on it as space, form, and light. And I don't have to translate anything beyond that. And I think that's just more of an interesting thing for myself to be aware of, is sometimes it's good to take a step back, but sometimes it's also good to dwell on things right in front of you that are personal to you. And I feel like as somebody that teaches architecture, I have found that most of the teaching seems to be situating the students outside of themselves or outside of their own world. And I'm always wondering why their projects aren't more meaningful. And perhaps it's because there isn't meaning there to them. And so this is where I'm just starting to think of being cautious that I'm actually, that it means something to me. And so this one is the last, the image, and this is just a walk around my dad's shed, so that same shed from the outside. And I think what's interesting between that and this is this, to me, and maybe because I know it's more legible as a building shape, I can pick out the opening, the roof lines, things like that. And I think it's because the place meant something to me. So I think that as we're studying places, and a lot of us are teaching students to do that, it's important for us to know when it's time to think about it like this and think about it like this. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam and Jordan. Totally fascinating work. The question, I think, is a simple one. Unlike many of the people in the room or other talks that we've had, you seem to both work as documentarians, let's say, reading situations and then drawing lives or hidden lives or capacities out of them. And the question maybe is simple. Do you imagine there's a reciprocal agreement between drawing these things out which exist and then going back as a result of your work and remaking those conditions themselves? So often architects, we use references and we draw from them, but seldom have I seen practices that go back to the references as a result of work that's done on them or through them, and then rebooting the references themselves. So it seems interesting to me that you would harvest things on the one hand. I think you're both harvesters and you're documenting things. Is there an interest, perhaps, the garden, your father's shed, and so on, to go back as a result of what you've now seen, to remake those places? Documentarians seldom do that, and you seem inventively documentary making people. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't feel that I don't feel that I'm documenting something, though. I think that maybe that's the thing that, like, in some way that's not really part of the process. I'm just kind of using it to start to gather things that might be in the future or in the past to bring there. And then so the reason why I'm not saying I'm a documentarian is because I'm not being very true, like, to what, to how someone else might see the thing. I'm being really, really, well, right now, just really, like, relishing in this kind of new space that I'm trying to make, this kind of territory where those things can become another thing than what they are. So I'm using my mother, but it's not my mother, because I wouldn't use my mother, but it's kind of, it's just, so for me, it's not quite I wouldn't consider myself at any point documenting, even though it seems the obvious thing to do because of the allotment. So I think I keep that as part of the structure, knowing that I can do that, and then I kind of do all the things that I'm not, like, maybe not supposed to do.
Yeah. I think about it constantly. Is what does it become? The idea of becoming. I feel like in work, it's this, then that, then that, and it becomes things. And I'm personally trying to become more comfortable in the never-ending becoming, that it doesn't get to a point where that project is wrapped up and it's finished. So maybe I'm cautious, but I'm also I don't know what the translation is. Like, what happens between this and that? Is it an installation and then? I'm just worried that if I treat things that way, then I won't dwell in them for what they are. And I think I'm just cautious that, and maybe it's just in the unknown of what that would be. But I think about it all the time. Does it need to? Does that make sense? Is it a step along the way? And if it did, what does that?
Maybe a quick follow-up, just really, really quick. Is there a fitness for both of you in terms of not just when to finish a photographic series or how many drawings you would make, Sam? Is there a moment where there's a kind of an ecstasy or a kind of an apex or a culmination where, okay, I made 48 of these, Jordan, and finito, or?
So that's what I think is weird about this work, and I feel I can't fully comprehend it, because I feel it's only at the very, very beginning, in a way, that it's something that's going to be very slow, and it's why I was saying that the work actually lies between the pieces, because don't think it's any one piece. So those last 3 drawings are just they came out of the body of another drawing, and as to when that way of thinking might end, I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think it's like this energy that a project will have, and if it has its own energy, then it can bring me with it a little bit. And then there's some times where if that moment switches and I'm dragging it along, then that's when it stops for the moment. Like with these things, I can't believe that those of you that spend years on work, and that just blows my mind. Like, I think it's awesome that you can sit and come back to something. The last time I did that, I came back to a painting that I did 10 years ago, and I painted the damn thing black. I was like, I don't know. So I just covered it and I started over, so that you can go back and back and back and remain interested in that project is a skill set that I think could be learned, and I'm just trying to get there. So to me, it's when the energy stops, and I don't know what that is, and it doesn't. And some of these, like, they'll happen so fast, and it just made itself. And I was just there. And maybe that's the documentarian side, that some places tend to reveal themselves to you in a certain way that just happens, while others are hiding behind a curtain, and you think you see it, and you can't find it. You know, that idea is just elusive. So, thanks.
Thank you, both of you, for wonderful presentations. You both had interesting ways, and particular ways of talking about memory and how that shaped your thinking in your work. And I'm wondering how the work itself, if it can be read as an act of remembering, as in remembering, layering different elements. Obviously, the layering is there. But for instance, what the Sam, specifically, you were talking about in one of your works, writing over objects on a lake. Those objects, these shapes are coming out. And my question, I think, are the shapes that come out through the remembering process, are those memory or are those new? Is that something different than memory itself? Is that a bridge to the future, or is that a key to the past?
Yeah, so that, in that particular scenario that I was discussing there, the drawing itself was, the shapes were just coming out from the actual physical experience, but then because I was mentally thinking of the lake, then that connection was made with what was happening. So it was serendipitous, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't conceptual. But then my ability to then make that bridge was just something, and I think that's a lot for me in the process of drawing and this work. I'm trying to find those connections between things to be able to remember things from another perspective, I would say. So there's actually, there's not really one place I'm standing within this work, and everything is turning itself over, folding and slipping, and the memories themselves are becoming sort of just totally other things that hold a lot of the emotions that the actual memory, the original memory would have had. So then it's embedding these these feelings within the work, but those kind of give a certain flavor to the way that the drawing then starts to unfold. So yeah, it's sort of it's a bit of a memory, like it's a kind of hybrid.
Yeah. When Google Earth first started Street View, your processors couldn't keep up, so it would lag, and you'd get the back. And I remember first doing that and thinking that feeling of whatever you went past, you're carrying in some way, these bits. So part of it is you document a place of time maybe, but there is something that I feel like you owe it to the memory to think about what its potential is. And that becomes the harder part, is what to do with it once you have it. And still unclear about that. But I think it's, both of a kind of a memory, but of something else. Also think that maybe there's a lack of language around the physical construct of what I even mean by using that term. Does that make sense? Some things you feel it before you get there. Me. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see if the language in which I'm going to try to ask this makes sense to both of you. If it doesn't, maybe we'll find another set of terms. But trying to tie something that I see with both the bodies of work and beautiful images, by the way. So thanks for sharing them. But at one level, both projects seem to be heavily invested in kind of the accumulation of traces over time, an index of processes, either material or imagistic. I mean, from a footprint to a photograph, these are two of the kind of examples we have of indexes within the history of art that have been talked about many times. But a photograph also ties directly into a kind of iconicity of the image looking like that which we think it's going to look like. And I think there's also something going on with both of you where this indexicality and iconicity is split. So we have the index, but we don't know what we're looking at anymore. And in that sort of rupture or that tension, or how much does the resemblance, the iconicity to its initial object that's either being traced, recorded, or photographed matter? And at what point then is the work actually kind of increasing or decreasing tension between the accumulation of material traces and that which it is as an image that we're looking at? And at some level, I want to tie this back to drawing, because drawing, actually, we do find constantly fascinations with the leftover traces of the activity of drawing, either the material of graphite or the ink or the mylar or the tools and templates and other things that we use, or even the smudge of a finger across a page. And so we tend to think of drawing as having a kind of indexicality to the material process of making. And so I think there's something really fascinating to pull those two things apart. And I don't know if do these terms make sense in terms of how I'm laying it out? Is this something either of you think is interesting to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you how that's. Thanks for putting it into those terms. You all have helped a lot, so thank you. Selfishly, that feels great. That split is ever present, and like I think that's where the energy stops or starts, at least in my drawings, where what point does what give over to which direction? And I think the confusing part is not knowing which end you're starting from. It's sort of like you're just doing this, and they might meet here if this is the middle of perfect overlap, and then they might meet here. So there's more fragment, more image, and then wherever they meet changes. And so the question, I think that's maybe the problem of the photograph or the video, is it's of a thing, and you begin with like something you recognize, you say you know. And I think that is the one step trying to make of where the capturing of it isn't known. But then it makes you question the photograph itself. So it comes back to what are you making and what are you using to capture, if not for those moments that you can, let's say, bring it back. And I know that I'm just a little cautious of it, maybe talking to that type of work that needs something that you know to then understand it, because I'm cautious of understanding. Like, does everything need to be understood? Does that make sense? That's the question, and I'm sorry to answer the question, but it's there. I just, haven't concluded that. Probably won't.
Yeah, maybe your hesitancy to over-identify with what you're is a little bit what I was trying to say with the memory needing to have kind of iterations of memory and to become something new, because I think it's, I mean, in my drawings, the indexicality is quite complicated, and for myself, I have to kind of keep lists of what it is that I've done in my lists anyway. So for me, it's more of there's a conjuring so that I can inhabit. It's really about the inhabitation, and then, going into my own little worlds. Whether the relevance to other people, I don't know. These are, like, for me, it's really it's just the start of something. So I don't know if it makes any sense. You guys are the first people. I haven't shown anybody anything. So
My question's actually more of an observation and something to think about, but I couldn't help thinking through both of your talks about a kind of Turner-esque atmosphere to the work. And for me, the thing that that actually Turner has that isn't necessarily found in your work yet is a kind of direct source of heat, like energy or light, the direct light. Both of your worlds rely on reflect or embody in reflected light, but direct light and the present of direct light in the drawings is, I think, a big question for you. It's just enough.
Do we speak to observation? Okay. So cool that you picked it up. I can't paint very well, so my processes I made them because I can achieve that layering, but I can digitally. Like, it makes more sense to me, and I think that's because I work too fast for paint to dry. So I can't keep up with the pace of a painting. But definitely that, I know exactly what you mean, I think, and that's, at least with the layering, the problem is in the way that it's done now, is that you reach a moment, it's just like darkness. It will absorb and absorb it, you know, and light will do that, and so that it comes, but I do think that there is it'll become all-encompassing atmospheric, and there's some places don't have that, so what I have found is accidentally I'm drawn to places that I already know, like back here, like what will become of it once it's on top of itself in other places. So I am trying to not listen, but I get it. Yeah.
Thank you both for lovely presentations. It is, oh, we can clap and then we can, I'm gonna launch.